You probably know I've been doing cybersecurity now for 30 years in the online world. Yeah, that long. I'm afraid I have some confessions to make about our relationships here, cybersecurity people and employees. I got pulled into this whole business of cybersecurity, quite literally kicking and screaming. I had been already involved in the development of the internet and internet protocols for a decade before. In fact, one of the contracts that I had was with a major manufacturer of computer systems. What I did there was design for Unix systems a way to check for malware, a way to manage them remotely. Yes, indeed, I made one of the first RMM systems, as we call them nowadays. We also tied that RMM system, of course, into Windows and a few other operating systems. Unix was where I was working at the time. I am what they call an OG in the industry. My gosh, my first job with computer networks was back in 75. Believe it or not, a long time ago. Back then, of course, it was mainframe to mainframe, basically, and some of the basic protocols, the RJE and stuff. I know I've got a lot of older people here listening who are saying, yeah, I remember that. It brings back memories. In fact, I got a note just this week from a listener who was saying his first computer was a Sinclair. Do you remember those things? Oh my gosh, it brought back so many memories for us older guys. But it was just such a cool little device with the keys, much different than I'd ever seen before. They're XZ81. I just looked it up online so I could remember what the model number was. That was made by Timex, if you can believe that, too. It's just, wow. It had a Z80 CPU, which, of course, was like an 8080, which was Intel's big chip at the time, running at 3.25 megahertz. Yes, indeed. Very cool. I love that computer. Anyways, I digress. The whole industry at the time was non-existent. So yeah, you had antivirus software. We started seeing that in the 80s. And we had some terrible operating systems that many people were running, like Windows, just absolutely horrific. Remember Windows 3.11 and XP and Millennial Edition? Just some of the most terrible software ever. That's what happens when you have interns. A lot of the code came out in one of the lawsuits for one of these versions of Windows. It was a different world, and I had to figure out what was going on because I had some servers. They were Unix servers. This was the early 90s, and I was hosting email for companies and websites and doing some filtering and things with some kind of precursor to SpamAssassin. It was really something. I had some DECservers, Digital Equipment Corporation. Remember those guys? And all of a sudden, customers started calling me because email wasn't working. It turned out it was working, but it was extremely slow. And I had to figure out why. I telneted to my server. I got on, started poking around. The servers, I had a computer room on the first floor of the building that I owned. And I was up on the second floor. Off we go, looking around, trying to figure out what is going on. It was me, actually. I said we, but it was really me because I knew the most about this stuff. There were these processes that just continued to fork. And I was trying to figure out, why is it creating all these new processes? What's going on? What has happened here? Back then, the internet was a much different place. We trusted everybody. We had fun online. We would spam people who broke our almost unwritten rules of the internet about being kind to other people. What spam was, where the whole term comes from, is you would send this script from Monty Python, spam an egg, spam and a ham, spam, spam, spam routine. You'd just send it to somebody that was breaking these unwritten rules, like trying to sell something on the internet. Absolutely verboten. What a change to today. I saw some of this stuff going on. I was trying to figure out what it was, but we trusted everybody. So my mail server, which was Sendmail at the time, we still maintain some instances of Sendmail for customers that need that. Nowadays, it's usually more something like postfix in the back end. You might have Zimbra or something out front, but postfix in the back end. We allowed anybody on the internet to get onto our mail server and fix some configuration problems. They didn't have full access to everything. Firewalls weren't then what they are today. In fact, one of our engineers just had to run out to a client who did something we told them not to do. They were using the SonicWall firewall on their network as well as they had our stuff. So we had a really good Cisco firepower firewall sitting there. And then they had the SonicWall so that their people remotely could connect to the SonicWall firewall because it's good enough. SonicWall says it's compliant. The SonicWall firewall was being used to scan the network and load stuff. Does that sound familiar? Much to our chagrin. So he had to run out and take care of that today. It sounds like we might have to do a rip and replace over there, restore from backups. You have no idea what these bad guys might have done. We've seen Chinese into these networks before, Chinese malware. It's been really bad. Boy, am I wandering all over the place. Back to this, we would allow people to get onto our network to fix things. If something was wrong, if we were misconfigured, they could help us and they could get on and do it because Sendmail configuration was not for the faint-hearted. In the days before Google, right? Eventually we had Archie and Veronica and Jughead that did basic searches across FTP servers. That's my kicking and screaming story. I was trying to run a business where we hosted email for businesses, which we still do to this day, and where we had some. Back then, we didn't have websites. The web didn't come into play until a couple of years later. But we did host FTP sites for businesses so that they could share files back and forth. That's what I wanted to do. That was my business. Later on, I ended up helping 80% of my clients find other web hosts after these $8 Gator hosting things. We just got a call on that this week. Somebody who'd been a client of ours 20 years ago went with a guy that charges $5 a month for web hosting. They have personally identifiable information on that site, if you can believe it. He was complaining because it wasn't working. He was getting a cPanel error anytime he went to the site. We said, hey, listen, this problem is the guy that you're hosting from. We did a little research and we checked the IP address and how many sites were at that IP address. This guy that was charging them $5 a month had 150 different websites at that one IP address. Now, that's not bad. He was hosting all of these 150 at a site that charges the $8 to $10 a month for web hosting. He had all of these sites on top of a machine that was already split up hundreds of ways. It's just amazing what people do. Man alive. We got rid of 80% of those customers, the ones that wanted cheap. That's fine. Get cheap and see what happens. To you. Some of them we still maintain a good relationship with, and so we help them out from time to time, right? What am I going to do? Somebody calls me, I gotta help them. That's precisely what we do. Now, with this malware problem, what's going on here? We talked already about the Great Suspender and how Google has said, hey, this now has malware in it, so we're removing it from your web browsers. That, to me, makes a ton of sense. Why not do that? This is another example of what happened with SolarWinds. This is an example of a supply chain infection. What happened with that? Somebody bought Great Suspender from the developer and then added in this basically malware to the Great Suspender. It's a terrible thing. Very surprising. But one of the biggest exploits that is being used by the bad guys right now is the security team's poor relationship with other employees within the organization. What's going on? And it goes back to this customer that we just had to run out to. Why did they do what we told them not to do?